7 weeks in, and these rankings look completely different than they did at the beginning of the season. Now, fair warning. I understand your favorite wide receiver may be ranked down there, wide receiver 36, wide receiver 37, wide receiver 35. This list will go to show the strength of the wide receiver position and how easy it is to find wide receivers you still feel safe about starting down there around wide receiver 40. With that being said, you are more than welcome to go to the comment section and tell me that I'm way too low on player X. But I want you to also clarify, who would you rank player X ahead of if you think I'm way too low on them? But starting off at the top end, we'll go Tyreek Hill, Jamar Chase, 1 and 2 in their own tier. Obviously, if Justin Jefferson was healthy, Jefferson would be at the very top. But with Jefferson missing at minimum the next 3 weeks with potential for more than that, hard to rank him there. Now, dropping down to tier 2, we'll have Stephon Diggs, Cooper Kupp ranked back-to-back. We'll go Keenan Allen at 5. What's actually funny is Keenan Allen is the number 2 wide receiver in the NFL right now from a points per game perspective. You would think that he actually needs to be a little bit higher than this, especially if you consider the fact that Keenan Allen's already through his bye week. And this is something that I talk about a lot this time of the year. If you're going out there, if you're making a trade, if you're trying to evaluate these guys from a rest of season perspective, you do need to give a premium to those players that have already made it through their bye, where you are going to be getting an extra week out of them. Because if you just think about it, ladies and gentlemen, we don't have that much longer of the season. Most people are going to have their playoffs start in weeks 15. So you have weeks 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. We have 8 more weeks of the fantasy football regular season. So if a player's already gone through their bye, you're going to get all 8 weeks. Whereas if a player hasn't, you're only going to get 7. And that's a difference of about 10 to 15% of the games played. So yeah, I'm going to be giving a bump up to someone like Keenan Allen, who has already made it through his bye week. Our next guy will be A.J. Brown. A.J. Brown's been the wide receiver 9 from a points per game perspective. Obviously in an elite level offense, has big play potential, and honestly could end up scoring a little bit more in terms of his touchdown rate going forward compared to where he has been. Now, Amon-Ra St. Brown will be our last wide receiver in this tier. Talked about it all year now, but with Amon-Ra St. Brown, not necessarily worried about Jameson Williams. Jameson Williams coming in helps this offense. He stretches NFL defenses, creates space underneath for the running backs, for St. Brown, and for Sam Laporta. Amon-Ra St. Brown's been the wide receiver 10 from a points per game perspective. And keep in mind, he did get injured earlier on in the season. And also with Amon-Ra St. Brown, I have great news for everybody. Y'all know last week we were able to hook up everybody that's ever used promo code FLOCK with a Justin Herbert special pick of more than less than half a total yard. Next week, week 8, we are going to be able to hook up everybody that's ever used promo code FLOCK on Underdog Fantasy with an Amon-Ra St. Brown special, more than less than half a total yard. And on top of that, if you are new to Underdog and use promo code FLOCK, you're going to get a 100% deposit match, our rest of season fantasy football rankings. On top of this, a Lamar Jackson special pick of more than less than half a total yard for this weekend. And on top of this, a LeBron James special pick of more than less than half a total point for this next week. Literally have never seen Underdog go ahead and give away 3 special pick'ems like this before. So please make sure you're taking advantage. Super happy we're able to hook you up with it. And you're only going to get all of them with promo code FLOCK, plus the rest of our rankings. And my favorite non-special pick'em this week on Underdog will be Bijan Robinson at more than 83.5 total yards against Tampa. Now, dropping down to our next tier, we'll be going with a CeeDee Lamb at 8. With Lamb, I understand the Dallas Cowboys offense has been very weird this year. Like, you're going out there and in some games we're blowing the doors off people, winning by 40 points. The other games, you're just face planting with everybody watching. So it's very difficult to accurately evaluate what we've had in Dallas. All I'll do is go back to what we had with CeeDee Lamb coming into the season, where last year he was the top 10 wide receiver, still incredibly young. Right now he's the wide receiver 19 from a points per game perspective. I expect him to get better though. Then Jefferson will be our next wide receiver at 9. With Jefferson, very dependent on your team on if you want to be rostering him or not. If you're 5-1, hell yes, let's go get Justin Jefferson. And if you're 5-1, 6-0, if you could trade CeeDee Lamb for Jefferson, go get Jefferson right now. However, if you're 1-5, 0-6, You need some points in this lineup right now. You can't just think about long-term upside. So I may, in that instance, actually trade away Justin Jefferson for someone like Davante Adams, who we have here, wide receiver 10. With Adams, yes, he's been disappointing over the past few weeks. Still the wide receiver 13 from a points per game perspective. Still up there as like the wide receiver 6 in targets on this season. So while Adams has been disappointing, I do think we're going to get a bounce back based off his volume. Now, dropping down to our next tier, this is where everything begins to get very murky and very cloudy. Like I was talking about previously, these wide receivers are so damn strong. You want as many of these guys here as possible. We'll go Olave, Waddle, Smith, 11, 12, 13. I know. Everybody's going to want to see the guy at 14 in Adam Thielen be higher than these wide receivers. I just am not as confident projecting out this offense for the Carolina Panthers as I would be with these other guys. Adam Thielen has been a mid wide receiver 1 so far this season. He is the wide receiver 6 from a points per game perspective. Now, of course, if we were just ranking these players based off how they've been through the first 6 weeks of the year, my life would be so much easier if I could just go out here and make videos, top 36 wide receivers so far. I mean, obviously, life would be easy. Projecting these guys out going forward, I'm a little bit more concerned about the Panthers offense than I would be with the Dolphins, with the Eagles, like Devonta Smith, still at 11 targets this past week, the same type of target volume that you're getting from Adam Thielen, yet he's a better talent, yet he's in a much better offense. We are going to have them in the same tier, so if you want to move Adam Thielen all the way up to 11, which I know a lot of people will want to, you do you, I'm going to do me. We'll have Puka here at 15. Like I said, still view Puka as that high-end wide receiver 2 in fantasy, even with Cooper Kupp coming in here. So, I mean, he was a sell-high guy for us earlier in the season, whereas now he's honestly kind of like a buy-low guy. I think you just have to project him out at this range going forward. Then Michael Pittman will be our next wide receiver at 16. Pittman, considerable target volume. No Anthony Richardson's probably a good thing, right? I mean, at least what we had last week with this Indianapolis Colts offense. A little bit reminiscent of what we had back in the good old days. Back with Jameis Winston, with him going out there, turning the ball over, being that DGAF quarterback that we very rarely get to see in the NFL anymore. That will just provide a lot of passing volume for these receivers. Then Brandon Ayuk will be our next wide receiver at 17. With Brandon Ayuk, this is an option that would move higher depending on the health and the availability of Deebo Samuel. He's been the wide receiver 16 so far from a points per game perspective. Obviously, in San Fran, kind of the opposite situation of what you're going to have with Indy, though, where the 49ers should be winning the majority of these games by such a wide margin that they're not really throwing the ball in the second half. And on top of it, I mean, kind of the opposite of Indianapolis, you just have weapon after weapon after weapon after weapon in San Francisco, where it's hard to imagine him going out there getting like the same target share that Michael Pittman would. Now, dropping down to our next wide receiver, we will have Amari Cooper. You'll know I drafted a lot of Amari this year. I mean, hell, I had him ranked ahead of Calvin Ridley, so I mean, we were naturally getting a considerable amount of him. I would like to have him higher than this, but he's only been the wide receiver 28 so far this season. Obviously, a lot of this hinges on what we're going to get with Deshaun Watson. Garrett Wilson will be our next guy at 19. With Wilson, if they were to make a play and go get like Kirk Cousins in here, then beautiful. Wilson skyrockets up these rankings. He's had so much target volume. The issue is, while Zach Wilson has looked much better over the past few weeks, still Zach Wilson is one of the worst starting quarterbacks in the NFL. Then DJ Moore will be in here at 20. Now, with DJ Moore, he was a sell-high guy for us last week coming off a monstrous game against Washington. He was number 1 in the NFL in fantasy points scored over expectation at the wide receiver position. The efficiency was through the roof. He had a bunch of big plays, which naturally what you're going to see is those come back down to earth. You get a little bit less of that efficiency, and you are going to be more so in a spot where you get a little less of that efficiency and it all is going to even out. I mean, I think it'll be a little bit closer to those actual fantasy point expectations. And that does have him more so as that mid wide receiver 2 and what should be the worst or one of the worst offenses in the NFL. Very similar to Garrett Wilson. Then Deebo Samuel, our next guy with Deebo. Issue has been injuries so far. I mean, if Deebo were to be fully healthy, obviously in a great offense, he could be much higher than this. But, I mean, it's hard to imagine Deebo Samuel being fully healthy based on what we've seen this year and in years past. And at the same time, even if he is, he's still competing with so many other guys for targets. T. Higgins will be our next wide receiver. Yes, I still have T. Higgins ranked as a top 24 option. He has done literally nothing this season. Literally nothing. You've had the Joe Burrow injury leading to just a very disappointing start of the year for the Cincinnati Bengals, combined with T. Higgins and his own injury 2 weeks ago. But we're not ranking these players on what they have done. We are ranking these players on what they may do going forward. And coming out of the bye week, if we have a fully healthy T. Higgins, as well as a fully healthy Joe Burrow, I think that this offense may hit the ground running. And I think we have a completely different team that we're going to be dealing with going into the future. Calvin Ridley will be a guy at 23. I did not draft Ridley at all this year. He was going at the 2-3 turn in underdog drafts. I thought it was a ridiculous price. Now, with that being said, I think that you still have to rank Calvin Ridley as a borderline top 24 guy. He's still getting volume, just a little bit more boom bust than you'd like to see. And I am recording this right before the Thursday night game. So if Calvin Ridley goes out there and drops 40 points, then of course we are subject to change these rankings, which you can always find on flogfantasy.com. Just in case you don't know, all these rankings are always on flogfantasy.com. We constantly have our updated rest of season fantasy football rankings and tiers there. We have our dynasty rankings and tiers there, and we have so many awesome tools coming for you. I'm investing everything I have into flogfantasy.com. Promo code FLOG if you're not already on there. 30% off any subscription. Plus, Mother Flogger tier, promo code FLOG. Yours truly will break down your team in a fantasy football podcast when you join. Now, DK Metcalf will be our next wide receiver at 24. I think this is who DK Metcalf is. I think DK Metcalf's going to be that low-end wide receiver 2, high-end wide receiver 3 from a points per game perspective. That's what we've seen this year with him being the wide receiver 23. The year prior with him being, I believe, like the wide receiver 26. The year prior with him also being outside the top 24. I do expect that Jackson Smith-Njigba continues to increase his role in this offense. And Tyler Lockett's leading the team in targets. Now, Jordan Addison will lead off our next year at 25. With Addison, it's kind of funny because he's a rookie. You'd assume that he continues to only get better as the season progresses. But I would almost want Jordan Addison more in the short term with no Justin Jefferson than I would in the long term once Jefferson's back. So it is a very unique situation that we are looking at. Christian Watson will be our next player. I understand with Christian Watson, very similar to T. Higgins. He has done absolutely nothing. He is the wide receiver 45 from a points per game perspective. But we've really only gotten to see 1 week with Christian Watson healthy and playing a full slate of snaps. And that was a week where you had Jordan Love just completely collapsing and giving you nothing. So it really does come down to what you believe Jordan Love will be going forward. If you think Love is a bottom 5 to 10 quarterback, then you probably have Christian Watson behind these next guys like Zay Flowers, Christian Kirk. And like I said, we are recording this right before this Jags game. So if Kirk goes out there and drops 35 points, these are subject to be changed. And I even hate mentioning like wide receiver rankings here. I hate saying like, oh, Mike Evans is wide receiver 29. Nico Collins, wide receiver 30. Myers, wide receiver 31. Hollywood Brown, wide receiver 32. Because it makes it sound like I'm very low on these players. It makes it sound like, oh my God, Mason, you have Hollywood Brown ranked as your wide receiver 32. Where in reality, he could so easily be up there next to DK Metcalf at 24. Next to Calvin Ridley at 23. Where I really want to just illustrate what we are looking at here at the wide receiver position. And this being more so an overall strategy of what we have going forward. You have the who's who of wide receivers at the very top. You're looking at those top 2 to 3 tiers. This is the who's who. This is those guys that have completely separated themselves from everybody else. And then once you get past that top 10 list, once we get down to 11 through, I want to say about 37, it is such a flat tier here where the expected difference from a points per game mark from a week to week perspective may end up being 2 points. Like, truly, what's the difference between the projection that you have, say, with Jalen Waddle this week versus the projection that you have with Hollywood Brown? They're pretty much the same thing. Like, if you go and look at all these wide receivers ranked like 11 through 37 with their underdog pick'ems, you're going to see all these guys right in between about 50 receiving yards on a week-to-week perspective versus about 65 receiving yards. Like, that's the projection for all these players. So I know the natural reaction is going, Mason, you're a madman. You're an idiot. How the hell do you have Myers at 31? And it sounds very bad whenever you see it on the screen. We have him there. I just want to illustrate those guys 11 through 35 they're so damn close that it really does come up to you. And I hate even having to go through and try to make this mark. Now, going over to our next tier, we are going to be looking at Chris Godwin, 33. With Godwin, he's been the wide receiver 34 from a points per game perspective. I think he can be better going forward just based off the volume that he has. But obviously, Mike Evans has been just going out there and dominating volume. We're going to have Deontay Johnson at 34. With Deontay, I'm coming back from an injury. I'm going to project him out probably to be the wide receiver 1 here in the long term over George. You know what? No, we can't do that. Based on what we've seen with Pickens, based on Pickens being the wide receiver 18 this year, we will move Pickens ahead of Deontay. Then Tyler Lockett at 36. With Lockett, he's leading Seattle in targets. Would I be that surprised if Tyler Lockett went out there and actually finished ahead of DK Metcalf rest of season? Probably not. Gabe Davis, 37, a little bit more of a touchdown or bust player, but still nonetheless someone that you can be okay with starting on a week-to-week perspective. And then dropping down to our next tier, we're going to go Terry McLaurin at 28. Terry McLaurin, 38. He's been the wide receiver 28. And I know us having him this low, and Mason, you're an idiot. How do you have him this? He's about the same as Amari Cooper. I know it's 18 versus 38, but all these guys are equivalent. JSN, 39, I think can continue to get better. We'll have Hopkins and London down here at 40 and 41. London's been the wide receiver 40 from a points per game perspective. Hopkins been the wide receiver 46, I believe, unless I wrote that down wrong, because that does seem very, very low. The issue with all those wide receivers at the very bottom end, except JSN, it's just the overall offense is so damn bad that it is difficult to get excited about those names in particular. But I think that's all I have for y'all. I really am hesitant to put this out because I know people are going to hate to see it. But again, thank you so much for being a member of the flock and supporting the channel. If you have not done so already, go down there, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel if you play fantasy football. And like I said, now is by far and away the best time to get on Underdog. We're getting y'all hooked up again with a special pick'em for only flock users. Next week, Amon-Ra St. Brown more than less than half a total yard. This weekend, if you're new to Underdog, a Lamar Jackson special pick'em more than less than half a total yard. And a LeBron James special pick'em more than less than half a total point. All three of those literally never happens, plus our rest of season fantasy football rankings and tiers and a 100% deposit match with promo code FLOCK. Only going to get all that with code FLOCK, so please make sure you take advantage. But thank you again. I really do appreciate you. Really hope you have a great day, and really hope we get to see you out in the live stream later tonight.